Well, listen to a story about a man named Jed who was a poor mountaineer and barely kept his family fed. He was a man of great patience and simple virtues, living a quiet life in a rustic cabin deep within the rolling hills where the green trees touched the blue sky. Every single day was a struggle to put food on the table for his beloved family, which consisted of his daughter Ellie Mae, his nephew Jethro, and his sharp-tongued but deeply caring mother-in-law whom everyone affectionately called Granny. They possessed very little in terms of material wealth, but their hearts were filled with an abundance of love, mutual respect, and a cheerful spirit that no amount of poverty could ever dampen. Then one beautiful and unforgettable day, while Jed was out in the woods shooting at some food in order to secure a hearty supper for his kin, an incredible miracle occurred that would change their lives forever. As his shot struck the earth, up through the ground came a bubbling mud that carried a strange and dark substance, which turned out to be oil, that is to say, black gold or Texas tea. In the blink of an eye, the first thing you know, old Jed became a millionaire with $65 million to his name, a sum so vast that it surpassed their wildest imaginations. The well-meaning kinfolk immediately gathered around and said that Jed must move away from there because a man of his new wealth needed a grander stage, and they all agreed that California was the place he ought to be. So, with hearts full of excitement and hope for the future, they loaded up their old trusty truck with all their modest worldly belongings and they moved straight to Beverly Hills, that is to say, the land of luxury, swimming pools, and movie stars. Even though they were now living in a magnificent mansion in the most prestigious neighborhood of California, the Beverly Hillbillies maintained their simple country ways, which often led to the most delightful and humorous misunderstandings with their new urban surroundings. On this particular sunny morning, Granny was out in the beautifully landscaped yard, squinting her eyes and holding her old rifle with absolute determination as she spotted a small creature near her precious patch of corn. She muttered to herself about sneaky little vermin coming in on her blind side, refusing to let any animal ruin the crop she had worked so hard to cultivate in this strange California soil. She called out to the creature, telling it to stay right there, because she was going to give it some rock salt and some bacon rind to go with its corn. Just as she was about to take aim, a loud gunshot echoed through the pristine air of Beverly Hills, and Jed came walking over, looking completely bewildered while holding a hat that now had a massive hole right through the center of it. Granny turned around, surprised by the sudden noise, and asked what he had shot, to which Jed replied with a sigh that he had shot his own hat. Granny looked at him with a mixture of amusement and confusion, asking what for, and Jed explained with a straight face that there was a crow sitting right on top of it, and that was the only way to get rid of it. Jed looked at the older woman with deep affection and gently suggested that Granny was getting too old to do her own scarecrowing because all that bending and lifting in the hot sun would cause her joints to lock up on her. He kindly offered to make her a brand new scarecrow to protect the corn, but Granny, being as stubborn and independent as ever, rejected the idea instantly, claiming that there was not a single scarecrow in the world that could shoot straight. She pointed at his ruined headwear and noted that he did not do too good himself this morning, but Jed defended his marksmanship by saying he definitely got the crow and blowed that rascal to kingdom come, leaving not even enough of him to feather an arrow. At that moment, Ellie Mae came running out of the mansion, looking deeply concerned as she begged Granny to please stop shooting at Elmer, their pet chimpanzee, who was currently shaking with fear. Ellie Mae explained that Granny was making the poor creature awful nervous, but Granny simply scoffed and told her to get that vermin out of here. Jed tried to mediate the situation, speaking to his daughter and telling her to talk to her grandmother because she was making a nervous wreck out of the animal. Granny, however, was not easily swayed and declared that she might just make a pie out of him, expressing her utter disapproval of the idea of dragging dead birds and strange animals into the living spaces. Jed looked at the chimpanzee, which was clinging to Ellie Mae for dear life, and observed that the creature did not look very dead to him, but Granny insisted that the rock salt she used had a way of preserving things. Before they could argue any further, Jethro came walking out of the house, holding a piece of bacon, and looking completely confused as he announced that somebody had just shot right through the window of his bedroom. He asked them to look at what he found, thinking it was the worst case of dander he had ever seen in his entire life. Jed took a closer look and gently corrected his nephew, explaining that the white substance was actually rock salt and the other piece was a bit of bacon rind from Granny's shotgun. Jethro, still misunderstanding the situation, innocently suggested that such a remedy was not going to cure his supposed skin condition and that he would probably have to dip his head in hot creosote to fix it. Jed tried to intervene and tell him to listen, but Granny told the boy to calm down and turn his attention to more important matters. Jed, wanting to avoid any more accidental property damage, suggested that Granny go out and look after her corn crop instead of worrying about Jethro's head. Granny threw her hands up in the air and asked what the use was, complaining that nobody could grow anything around here anymore with all the crybabies, the crows, and the bats constantly causing trouble. Jed, trying to be factual, reminded her that they did not have any bats in the area, but Granny quickly countered by asking about the old bat next door, referring to their neighbor, Mrs. Drysdale. Granny complained that the woman called the police every single time they tried to do something to improve the place, such as raising hogs or chickens or running a few goats in the yard. Jed, always the voice of reason and fairness, told her that she could not fault Mrs. Drysdale for that because they had to remember they were now living in the city. Granny spat on the ground and asked if he truly called this living, stating that she felt buried in the city and was getting absolutely tired of the whole situation. Jed sighed, understanding her frustration, and asked if she would prefer to live in the country where folks could actually breathe, raise things, and shoot off a gun whenever they pleased. Granny enthusiastically agreed, which gave Jed a wonderful idea, and he turned to Jethro, whom he called Nuggins, to share his plan. Jed reminded Jethro that Granny's birthday was coming up very soon, and Jethro nodded, saying he knew that already. Jed explained that he wanted to make her a wonderful scarecrow for her corn patch to ease her burdens, and Jethro, inspired by the spirit of generosity, announced that he was going to make her a great big old cedar chest because he knew how she was always talking about needing one to store her belongings. Jed agreed that it was a dandy present, and Jethro eagerly asked what his uncle was planning to give her. Jed smiled warmly and said he was going to give her a piece of ground, a nice plot of land out in the country where she could plant whatever her heart desired. Jethro shouted with joy, calling it a hot dog of an idea, and suggested they call Mr. Drysdale at the bank to arrange the purchase. At that moment, Ellie Mae stepped forward and politely excused herself, telling her Uncle Jed that he did not have to call Mr. Drysdale about buying a plot of ground because she had seen some for sale just yesterday. Jed was surprised and pleased, asking if she was sure, and Ellie Mae confirmed that it was out in the country alongside the road, featuring a great big sign that urged people to buy their loved one a plot in Happy Valley. Jed smiled at the beautiful name, thinking that Happy Valley sounded like a wonderful, green, and fun spot for Granny to spend her days gardening. Jethro volunteered to make the call for his uncle and asked Ellie Mae for the phone number, which she quickly provided. Jed reminded them both to be very careful and not to say a single word to Granny because they wanted this to be a complete and total surprise for her birthday. Meanwhile, over at the office of Happy Valley, which was actually a local cemetery, the director, Mr. Mortimer, answered the telephone and introduced himself. Jed spoke into the receiver, greeting him warmly and introducing himself as Jed Clampett, explaining that he was looking to buy a nice plot of ground for Granny. Mr. Mortimer, assuming this was a standard inquiry for a burial plot, nodded and noted that Mr. Clampett wanted something nice for his grandmother. Jed gently corrected him, explaining that, strictly speaking, the lady was his mother-in-law. Mr. Mortimer, following the typical patterns of his profession, immediately assumed that a mother-in-law plot meant the customer would want something inexpensive, but Jed quickly corrected that notion, stating that money was absolutely no object and he wanted the absolute best they had to offer, provided the land was located out in the country. Mr. Mortimer assured him that Happy Valley was situated in a beautiful pastoral setting, which made Jed very happy as he remarked that pasture land would be just dandy. Jed explained that Granny did not want to be buried in the city, especially not in the backyard, which caused Mr. Mortimer to gasp and state that he certainly hoped not, adding that it was actually against the law. Jed laughed and said they had found that out the hard way, because every time they went to dig in, their neighbor called the police on them. Mr. Mortimer, Becoming slightly concerned about the unusual nature of the conversation, tentatively asked if Mr. Clampett was by any chance on welfare. Jed replied that they lived at 518 Crestview Drive, but Mr. Mortimer clarified that he was referring to their ability to meet their financial obligations, explaining that while he appreciated the call, he would have to ask about their credit. Jed, misunderstanding the word credit, explained that it was Jethro who had seen the sign, so he reckoned Jethro ought to get all the credit for the discovery. Mr. Mortimer realized there was a massive communication gap and tried to put it another way, asking plainly if Mr. Clampett had a bank account. Jed proudly replied that he kept his money in a Commerce Bank right there in Beverly Hills, but before he could finish, he saw Granny walking into the room and hurriedly told Mr. Mortimer that he would talk to him later before hanging up the telephone. Granny walked into the room, looking highly suspicious, and remarked that Jed looked as guilty as 3 possums in a hen house. Jed tried to play it cool, asking what she was talking about, but Granny demanded to know who was on the telephone just now. Jed claimed it was nobody, but Granny was not easily fooled. Meanwhile, back at the Happy Valley office, a young salesman named Mr. Brubaker entered, and Mr. Mortimer told him he was ready for him to call on a new bereaved family. Mr. Mortimer handed him a fact sheet and explained that the client's name was J.D. Clampett, the address was in Beverly Hills, and the bank account contained an astounding $65 million. Mr. Brubaker's eyes went wide with dollar signs, and he asked for the name of the loved one. Mr. Mortimer replied that as far as he was concerned, the main client was J.D. Clampett, but the name of the dearest party, the mother-in-law, was simply Granny. He instructed Mr. Brubaker to try to sell them a large family plot because these people were clearly loaded with cash. Mr. Brubaker looked at the sheet and noted there were 4 people in the family, but Mr. Mortimer greedily suggested selling them 5 plots, including one for their banker. Mr. Brubaker was confused by the inclusion of a banker, but Mr. Mortimer joked that when a man with $65 million passes away, the banker would surely kill himself from grief. He then remembered the banker was married too, and jokingly told his salesman to sell them a 6-pack of plots. Mr. Brubaker, trying to maintain some professional dignity, asked Mr. Mortimer to remember he was not peddling beer anymore, but Mr. Mortimer lamented that he was barely peddling plots either, complaining that the man who sold him the property promised he would make a killing, and he might actually have to resort to that just to get some business. Back at the Clampett mansion, Granny was busy preparing her own remedy, telling Jed that he had fair warning, and this time he was going in a pot if he did not leave off shooting, or else he would have the police down on them again. She took a sip from a jug, explaining that it was her special rheumatism medicine, but Jed advised her to take it easy on that particular jug. Granny insisted that the liquid was strictly for medical purposes because she could feel the rheumatism burning its way up her legs and